You finally got what you wanted. The quiet weekend. The partner who doesn't raise their voice. The bank account that isn't hovering near zero. The absence of a crisis. You look around, and everything is objectively fine. But instead of exhaling, you begin focusing on a low-grade hum of dread that begins to vibrate just behind your ribs. You find an obscure reason to pick a fight. You create a sudden, urgent problem out of thin air. You take a perfectly good moment, and you break it. If you do not understand why you do this, you will spend the rest of your life burning down your own sanctuaries, just to feel the familiar warmth of the fire. We'll begin by mapping this exact behavior. We will look first at the body's hidden alarm, then how the mind translates that alarm into sabotage, and finally, the specific mechanism required to actually tolerate the calm. The logic of human survival is deeply counterintuitive. We assume that we naturally gravitate toward comfort and safety. But the nervous system is not interested in your idea of happiness. It is entirely consumed with your survival. And to a nervous system that spent its formative years, or a prolonged season of adult trauma, navigating unpredictability, the absence of chaos does not register as peace, but as a blind spot. When you grow up in an environment where the other shoe is always dropping, the brain's protective shadow adapts. It learns to read the room. It monitors the slamming of doors, the shift in a parent's tone, the sudden financial panic. It wires itself for a state of chronic vigilance. High alert becomes your baseline. Adrenaline becomes your default fuel source. So years later, when you finally arrive at a quiet Sunday afternoon with nothing to fix and no one to manage, the body's internal alarm begins to scream. The silence feels deafening. The paradox of prolonged stress is that we do not simply fear the bad things. We become terrified of the good things. When things are chaotic, at least you know what to do. You know how to survive. You know how to soothe, how to hustle, how to detach. Chaos is painful, but it is predictable. Peace, on the other hand, requires you to lower your shield. And to a hypervigilant mind, lowering your shield feels like an open invitation for disaster. It feels like you are turning your back on the dark. So the body sounds the alarm. It sends a surge of cortisol into your bloodstream, demanding immediate action. But here you are just sitting on your couch. There is no predator and no crisis to manage. This is where the mind steps in to do its job. It doesn't want to stay in the dark forever, so it tries to solve the mystery. If the body feels panic, the mind assumes there must be a valid reason. It begins scanning your reality, desperate to find a target for all this unspent survival energy. It translates the physiological discomfort of calm into psychological sabotage. You look at your partner, who is quietly reading a book or doing something beneficial. Instead of feeling love, you feel a sudden, sharp annoyance. You remember a minor mistake that was thought to have been forgotten and gone. You, without hesitation, decides to bring it up. The tone and energy of the moment is changed, and the argument begins. The peace is shattered, but somehow the tension is finally released. The internal environment finally matches the external reality. You are back in the storm, where you know how to sail. Or perhaps, there's no one to project this feeling onto, so the sabotage turns inward. Let's say you finally have a free evening to work on that creative project you have been dreaming about. The space is clear. The time is yours. But the quiet feels like too much to carry. So you started focusing on something else. You internally consumed the anger, hate, comparison, and noise for hours, as if with no end. You soon feel exhausted by it all, but you successfully avoided the terrifying vulnerability of sitting with yourself in the stillness. This is the ultimate illusion of control. We create our own chaos because we would rather be the authors of our own suffering than be caught off guard by an unpredictable joy. It is a tragic defense mechanism. You are trying to protect yourself from a sudden drop by throwing yourself off the cliff voluntarily. You break the relationship before it can break you. You ruin the Saturday before the Sunday blues can creep in. You keep the motor running because you are terrified that if you turn the engine off, it might never start again. Breaking this cycle cannot be done through logic alone. You cannot outthink a biological alarm system. You can tell yourself 1,000 times that you are safe, that this environment is healthy, that you are allowed to rest. But until the body actually believes it, the mind will continue hunting for problems. The shift from sabotage to regulation happens in the body first. It requires a radical shift in how you relate to the physical sensation of calm. When the quiet settles in and the urge to break it rises up in your throat, you have to recognize the physical sensation for what it is. It is not an intuition telling you something is wrong. It is a withdrawal symptom. You are detoxing from cortisol. The spasms, the restless legs, The sudden, flashing irritability. This is the physical cost of transitioning from wartime to peacetime. You must learn to build a tolerance for boredom and treat peace not as a natural state to fall into, but as a difficult skill to be practiced. When the urge to pick the fight or create the crisis peaks, the task is not to suppress the anxiety, but to simply sit there and let the alarm ring without answering it. You notice the urge to send the passive-aggressive text, to obsess over the unanswered email. You watch the impulse rise, peak, and eventually, if you do not feed it with action, begin to fall. The silence is not a predator. You are slowly stretching the window of what you can endure without reaching for a distraction or a disaster. It is grueling work, and deeply uncomfortable to realize that the enemy is no longer outside the gates. The war is over. You survived. You are simply a person whose mind is profoundly adapted to a conflict that has already ended. But understanding this protective shadow is only the first half of the equation. Knowing why you break the silence does not automatically teach you how to live inside of it.